tax collection performance and required in Bangladesh, tax collection performance and required to policy change. At the beginning of the 21st century, Bangladesh is one of the emerging economies in South Asia. Now it's known as the Asian tiger. For the last several years, its economic growth remarkable. Bangladesh is also one of the world's fastest growing economies among the LDC. Recently, UNCPD proposed to graduate Bangladesh from LDC to DC. Bangladesh is now the 39th largest economy in the world, and its GDP gradually increases over the year, and from the last 2 decades, its growth is increasing remarkably. After its independence from Pakistan in 1971, Bangladesh was recognized as a new nation with many problems and limitations. On the first anniversary of the victory in 1972, Bangladesh's GDP was $6.29 billion and it became $302.57 billion in 2019. Bangladesh is positioned as a link between the emerging markets of South Asia and the fastest growing markets of Southeast Asia and ASEAN countries. From Bangladesh, Europe is most exported side than the USA and the most in balance of export and import with India. As of now, Bangladesh has one of the lowest tax revenue ratios on GDP in the world. Here is the tax revenue ratio on GDP is about 7.5% to 15%, and it's very low among the same categories country among LDC and DC. This dissertation analyzes the overall tax collection performance of NBR and its lack of collection procedure and quantitative data analysis. Government's tax collection performance, the vital source of people's standard of living. Some of the keynote points of limitation of the tax authority on tax revenue collection system and where need to change policies are lack of transparency, independence, and commitment. Taxpayers' ethical and psychological values conjointly influence tax compliance. Lack of exploitation IT and digitalization in tax collection procedure. Problem with traditional tax return filing. Implications for other developing countries. Some of the tax policies were made by a significant political influence. Corruption between the officials and taxpayers. Strengthening the governance of tax administration in the Asian region. True independence of auditor and auditing firm with full responsibility. Tax evasion, tax avoidance and ethics of agents can influence in tax collection. Tax practitioners also have a role in tax collection compliance. Tax authorities' errors. It may be apparent to the professional accountant. In the last few years, tax revenue percent of GDP increase, but as the GDP growth tax growth tiny in other countries like us and as well as OECD countries above this rate. The revenue cost ratio of $60 in Bangladesh income tax administration as a whole also seems to be low compared to 200 in USA, 100 in Canada and Sweden. Income tax as a percentage of GDP is only around 1% and decreasing over years. The neglect to control mechanisms, particularly during the 90s, is not surprising considering the socio-political scenario of the country, although it is inconsistent with the increasing importance given to good governance across the world, both in the corporate and public sector. The successive governments have mainly relied upon incentives but could not enforce the control mechanisms. The corporate tax rate has been reduced from 45% in the 1980s to 35% in the 1990s, and it's still moving between 30% and 40%. The earnings threshold for income tax has been continuously raised. The self-assessment system has been made easier. Tax holiday benefits have been extended year after year. Discretionary powers of tax officials have been reduced. But the institutional control mechanisms are getting weaker age after age. To make a change in the global index, our government needs to increase the tax ratio against GDP from 12% to at least 20%. For the lack of good governance, our government loses lots of revenue and there is a huge lack of ESG, environmental, social and governance.